Good morning, everybody. I'm so happy to be here, back on this stage. So it is my absolute great honor to introduce Amy Bowers Cordalis this morning as our keynote speaker. The thing is, after attempting seemingly endless logistical solutions, planes, trains, and automobiles to get herself here, it turns out the winter weather actually prevented her from being able to travel here in person. So do not fear. We have been testing the tech. This is going to be our first ever live remote keynote for River Restoration Northwest, but Amy is such a compelling speaker and individual that we are just so thrilled we're able to pivot in this way, and that the technology is going to help us out. So let me get into it. Amy Bowers Cordalis is a devoted advocate for Indigenous rights and environmental restoration. A member of the Yurok tribe, she's a fisherwoman, attorney, and mother. Amy is known for her work supporting tribes in protecting their sovereignty, lands, and waters, including the historic Klamath Dam Removal project, which is the focus of our morning here. In this past year, Amy was named a Time 100 Climate Leader and a Champions of the Earth, which is the UN's highest environmental honor. We have a bit of a legend. I've been really inspired personally by Amy's work in the Klamath for years, and the River Restoration Northwest Board asked Amy to join us today to talk about the decades of work she's dedicated to restoring natural flow on the Klamath River, and to share her vision of where the Klamath Basin and all of us can go from here. Currently, Amy is the founder and executive director of Ridges to Riffles Indigenous Conservation Group, which is now working to restore rivers in the Klamath Basin and beyond. And I really hope that we get a chance to talk to Amy more about the work of R2R and the ways that that organization and some of us in this room can collaborate and really help keep our practice moving forward. So when I asked Amy how she'd like to be introduced, this is what she said. She said, "I'm a fishing person, and I love to be on the river," which I think so many of us can really relate to that deep feeling. Our collective challenges are really big these days, and there are seemingly impossible projects in each of our home watersheds that we're working on. As we this morning, celebrate a free-flowing Klamath River, I hope that you can also draw inspiration for your seemingly impossible projects. At this time, we're going to turn it over to Amy on the big screens here, and she should be able to see us in the room as well. We have a little camera up here so that she can get the sense of that we are all here and listening with her. After her presentation, we'll have time to do Q&A and that will include some of the folks who are joining us online. Again, this is the first time we're able to live stream something online to others. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Amy.
Good morning, Skuenakoi. Can you hear me all? Okay, awesome. I cannot hear you. Oh, because you've got that on mute. All right, so I think that'll be okay. Okay, well, let's start at the beginning. Skuenakoi, Ayakui, Neknau, Amy Bowers, Cordalis, Nuwak, Rekwoi, Numite Wa, Wak Lao, Wak Lao, Wak Lao. I just want to thank the conference organizers for having me, for that wonderful introduction, for accommodating me, participating virtually this morning. And I do want to send a real heartfelt apology for not being there in person. It took the norovirus, a massive epic snowstorm, 2 broken down trucks, and sick babies to keep me all from being there with you in person. But I'm feeling really grateful for our modern technology and for open hearts and intelligent people. And also a special shout out to DJ from Yurok for all his extra support. But feeling grateful for all of that, to be able to be with you virtually. And I feel a lot of responsibility in communicating the work that we've done on the Klamath. And it is precious, and it is revolutionary, and it deserves the highest care and respect about how we talk about it. So while I would just, while I'm there in spirit, walking across the stage and throwing my hands up in the air and trying to get all your guys' good energy, I'm going to do my best to honor you and to honor the Klamath through a virtual presentation. And so today, my intention is to sort of do a multimedia experience, we'll call it that. And so I'm going to use some clips. I'm going to use a couple maps. We're going to do a breath exercise. And what I'm hoping is that through the next sort of, let's see, we've got about 40 minutes together. I can share just a slice of the hope that the work on the Klamath has given me and has given my community out at the Yurok, and that you can take that hope and also the best practices and apply those to your own home waters. Apply those best practices, those good intentions, that vision, the possibility and the hope that things can be different, and apply that to your work wherever you are. I thank you for the introduction. I don't think I need to go into any more other than to say I appreciate Caitlin highlighting that I'm a fisher person, and that's why I do this work. My family is from the mouth of the Klamath River, which maybe I'll put this image up now before I get into it. So, and give me a hand. Y'all know where the Klamath River is? Hands up. Yay. Okay. All right. So we know where we're at. I'm gonna try to figure out where my share. There it is. Okay. And share. Okay. Here is a map of the Klamath. This is Oregon, California area. And so my family is from the mouth of the Klamath at the village of Requoy. And I grew up fishing all through the lower Klamath River. And I have the great honor of being from a Yurok ceremonial family. So we are the family from Requoy that has the dance obligations to hold what we call world renewal ceremonies, and to also be stewards and to care for the fish that come into the river, care for the river itself. And we have a very beautiful sacred site there right at the mouth. Her name is Oregos, and she sits overlooking the mouth of the river and the ocean, and her role is to tell the salmon when to come in, and when it's safe to come in and start their journey upriver. And so I come to this work from a place of ceremony and fishing and connection to the river, which really reflects the Yurok way of life. And so much of what Yurok does and what we have tried to do through the period of colonization is preserve our way of life by caring for the river. And so much of what we have done specifically with the dam removal project has been an exercise of continuing that historical legacy of caring for the river itself. Today, what I want to talk about and what I wanted to focus my talk on is that, and I titled it Year Zero, because on the Klamath, we are in the first year of a revolutionary change in systems following the removal of 4 dams on the Klamath. And it is remarkable. It is historic. It is sort of unbelievable. And so today, I'm going to tell you the stories of how we did it. But I want us to also sort of open our hearts so that we can even comprehend what we've done. So a little bit of historical context about the Klamath. It was historically the third largest salmon producing river in all the lower US. There are historical, Yurok stories about there being fish in the river year round, and they were so thick and so abundant and plentiful that at certain times of the year, you could walk on the backs of salmon across the river. And certainly my people and all of the people along the Klamath River benefited in historical times from this abundance. The Klamath River is also, it's Indian country from its headwaters at my home village all the way up to the top part of the system up here in the Upper Klamath Lake area. Colonization, of course, brought changes. They're up at the top of the basin in 1905. The Klamath Reclamation Project was authorized, which dramatically changed the plumbing and the ecosystem functions of the whole system. There were lakes in this area that were drained. There were over 200,000 acres of wetlands that were drained throughout this entire area and converted into farming lands. The river was rerouted, agricultural canals were built, and the river was diverted in order to support that very large, what is still one of the largest reclamation projects in the country. Further downriver in this area, 4 dams were built between 1913 and 1964, and this essentially cut the basin in half. Iron Gate was literally what it was. It was an iron gate that blocked all fish from passing, through here up into their historical grounds. And it cut the basin in half and severed that sort of historical abundance that we had all enjoyed in historical times. But fortunately, some things have changed. As y'all know, we removed these dams, and so now the river is restored. And before I go into sort of the rest of the talk, I want to pause, and I'm gonna play you guys a video. So long as y'all promise me you'll stay engaged, you'll stay active, you'll stay interested, I'm gonna give you a Michael Bay type little, they call it a sizzler about Klamath Dam removal, and there will be explosions. So I'm hoping it'll be exciting. And also, what I think is really important is some of the people who were key to Klamath Dam removal are in this sizzler. And I want you all to see them, because one of the main points coming out of dam removal is that there is not one, star of dam removal. There wasn't one person who accomplished dam removal. There were many champions of dam removal, and those champions did big and small things day after day after day for 20 years. And that's what made us successful. And, one of the lessons learned is that means that all of you in your daily work matter, right? And what you do on a day-to-day basis and how you work with others matters. And when we unite under a collective goal, we can accomplish world-changing, life-changing projects. But I'm hoping that was invigorating and exciting to see. So, and those explosions were just the beginning. There were more, several more. And so it's been quite a year. So following all that, what we are observing here and our intention for the future of the Klamath is that we are in this year zero, where we are beginning a new system of river and fisheries management. And what we're hoping is that the Klamath will prove that nature-based solutions will work when humans as stewards work to restore the traditional ecological functions to rebuild ecosystem resiliency. This is a scalable model for the climate crisis solution, or excuse me, the climate crisis that we're all facing, and it is a path toward healing of the planet and ourselves. Revolution starts with a change in consciousness. And on the Klamath, it's difficult to perceive the massive scale of dam removal and the restoration project itself without seeing it. You know, we call it it is the largest river restoration project in history. But what does that actually mean, and how does it feel? I encourage all of you to come visit the Klamath, and Ridges to Riffles would be happy to host you and help facilitate that. But for now, what I want to try to do is get us into a place where we can open our minds to accept that. Restoration work is hard. Changing systems, changing laws, changing political systems, regulatory systems is hard. Times in our country now are hard. But we have to keep moving, and we have to rely on places like the Klamath that give us hope, to show us that progress, that change, that healing is possible, but it's also necessary for our survival. One of the lessons that I have learned from working with Yurok elders is that the first step in creating change is to have the vision, and to see it, and to believe that it is a part, or that something new can be. For many Indigenous leaders on the Klamath, they had the audacity to believe that dam removal was possible because in our stories, in our myths, we were able to remember through those stories what the river was like pre-colonization, pre-dams. And so I wanted us to go through an exercise now, which I think will help us open our minds, to see what we can do in our home waters, and to try to also get a vision of what we were able to do on the Klamath. And so I'm also going to ask for you guys to be very active participants in this, and to stay with me as we go through this. So I am going to play a video, and this video is images of some of the first salmon coming back into the historical spawning grounds behind the project area, the dams, into the tributaries where they hadn't gone in 100 years. And what you'll see is just truly remarkable. It's the leader salmon coming up the river, going into these tributaries and spawning. And as we're watching that video, I encourage all of you to try to ground yourself and put your hand over your heart and watch these fish. And as we do that, I'm going to share a story that I'm hoping will help put us into the present moment here. So I'm going to press play on this. And here we go. Okay, so watch for these babies. There she is. Okay, so if you're so inclined, put your heart or your hand over your heart, and I'm going to tell us a story. So in Yurok, there is a myth, and it says the sun and the moon are lovers, and the dawn is their favorite time because they are in the sky together. It's the only time they are together. And the new day is their baby. It is a present to us, and that is why it is called the present. We must always be thankful for the present, to honor the sun, the moon, and the power of love. To help us be in the present, we will forgive the past. By giving up the hope that the past could have been different, we will let go of the burden of this past. And this will allow us space in our hearts and minds for new energy and new ideas that lead to a new future. And in this new space, I welcome all of us to the present, this moment. May our hearts be full of gratitude for the opportunity to gather together to discuss how we will collectively renew the world using every tool we have possible or available. And we will believe in our collective ability to solve the most pressing environmental challenges of our time, because we have seen it on the Klamath. We will acknowledge and be full of gratitude for the salmon that have returned. We will be happy and in gratitude that the water is healing and that we are here in the present where this is a reality. Okay, breathe in and breathe out. All right. And now we are here in the present. I am going to stop sharing my screen. And, okay. How is everyone feeling? Good. Okay. Oh, good. Good. Thank you guys. Okay. I'm so happy. All right. Okay. You just gave me a lot of energy. So now I'm going to dive into the logistics of how we pulled this off. All right. Everybody ready? Okay. Here we go. So it started with the fish kill. And it was awful. It was terrible. And as Vice Chair Myers, the former Vice Chair Myers of UROC said in the video, we thought the end of the world was near. Now we have a duty as UROC people to do what's called fixing the world. In our creation stories, basically we were told by the creator that the earth, the water, the plants, the animals were all made for us, for the humans, and that as long as we lived in a balance with the natural world, we would never want for anything. And basically what the creator said is, if you live in a balance and if you accept that responsibility, then you will have this abundance. And we agreed. And that created reciprocal duties between the Yurok people and the natural world to live in a balance, right? Where we had the great privilege of being the beneficiaries of the abundance of the Klamath, but that carried this responsibility to be the stewards and the caretakers. And we lived in that balance for a very long time. And that was disrupted by colonization. And everything really came to a head in 2002 with the fish kill. And so that triggered our duty as the stewards, as the caretakers, to renew the world. And so after the fish kill, generations of Yurok people, including myself, including Barry McCovey, Louisa McCovey, Molly Myers, I mean, the list goes on and on and on, of people who were motivated to fix the Klamath. And they launched Yuroks, Karuks, Klamath tribes. We launched this movement that started with protest. It started with grassroots organizing and protest, and they took on the richest man in the world, Warren Buffett. In the early 2000s, when all this was starting, Pacific Power, owned by Berkshire Hathaway, were the owners of this, of the dams. And so they took him on. They took on the richest man in the world, and they protest. They went around the world. They went to shareholders meetings and held signs up that over I-5, for example, that said, Warren Buffett kills fish. And they created pressure. They got the attention of the shareholders, and the shareholders started asking questions. Now, right around when that was happening, also, there was a little bit of luck in that the FERC license, which is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission license, expired to operate the Klamath dams, and a relicensing procedure was set to start in 2008. So this created a regulatory and legal proceeding that allowed dam opponents to advocate for dam removal. So of course, the proceeding went through, it was a contested hearing, which meant that it led to some, legal hearings, back and forth, filings, and there's some really remarkable stories about things that happened in those hearings, which I won't get into now, but hopefully maybe sometime we'll have an opportunity to talk about that. But here's what came out of that. And one of the lessons learned is that regulatory and legal processes and and the strength of them are really in the due process that they afford people. And if communities, the public, has the power to be able to uplift their voice in these regulatory processes and communicate their concerns, their desires, their legal rights, we do have a system here, and I believe in this, that gives us some protections to advocate for ourselves. And that's how my community was able to use this FERC proceeding. And there was this powerful moment where all of the hearings, all of the filings led to an order where the tribe had put forth its legal rights and basically saying that the tribe had federally reserved fishing and water rights that required the dams be removed because the dams were essentially annihilating the salmon runs. By the time all of this had gone through, and this was like the 2008 kind of era, salmon runs on the Klamath were down to single-digit percentages of their historical size. And also, UROC had built up a world-class fisheries department that was able to put together the science that proved in these court proceedings that dam removal was the only option that would adequately protect the tribe's legal rights. Then NIPS came along and did the right thing and looked at the Federal Power Act, and Section 8 allows NIMS to prescribe fish prescriptions if there's, anadromous fish present that need help within a potential project to be relicensed. So here, NIMS said the only way for the tribe's rights to be protected and for fish to be protected in the relicensing of these dams is if fish ladders are installed. And of course, these dams had been built without any fish passage. And so the dams, if basically what the result of all this was, is that if Pacificor wanted to renew its license, it had to install these fish ladders. So Pacificor pressed pause on the proceedings and did an economic analysis of whether it was cheaper to completely remove the dams or to install the fish ladders. And guess what? It was cheaper to remove the dams. So all of a sudden, Pacificor had an economic interest in removing the dams because it was cheaper for their stakeholders than to install these fish ladders, which would have been a requirement for a new license. And there's a couple of practice points from just that scenario there. One, tribal rights, treaty rights, federally reserved rights are powerful, powerful, underused tools in the law. Treaty rights, federal Indian reserved rights are the supreme law of the land. And in times of conflict between other rights, they are entitled to priority. And here on the Klamath, they were a driving factor for how we were able to create the leverage, the legal leverage that then got us towards a settlement agreement and then ultimately dam removal. And across watersheds throughout the Pacific Northwest, throughout the whole country, there are underused tribal rights that could be elevated in order to help assist in environmental restoration efforts. So that's one. The other practice point here is that when we're thinking about how we accomplish these, projects bigger than we've ever done before, things that change the status quo, we have to find rational paths forward. And they can be, short, little, immediate paths, steps that we can take that make sense for business, that make sense for environment, that makes sense for Indigenous peoples. And here, that economic analysis that demonstrated it was cheaper to remove the dams than it was to install the fish ladders, that was the beginning of the rational path forward to dam removal. So always look for that rational path. So then what happened is once we realized that there was this path forward and it was cheaper, we started settlement negotiations. And those settlement negotiations resulted in the Klamath Hydroelectric Settlement Agreement, which I'll call the KHSA. It's a $450 million agreement that contemplated the removal of the lower 40, or excuse me, the removal of the lower 4 dams on the Klamath and restoration of habitat throughout the former project area. The agreements were signed in 2010. And these agreements, there was another companion agreement called the Klamath Basin Restoration Agreement that terminated, which was sad. But the agreements themselves were very historic in nature. So the KHSA, essentially, the general concept was this, is that there would be the creation of a dam removal entity, a nonprofit that came to be known as the Klamath River Renewal Corporation that would facilitate dam removal. And the idea was that the KRC would assume liability for dam removal as it went through, because one of Pacificor's primary concerns was the liability issue. So by creating this nonprofit entity, it could, and get insurance, bonds, so on and so forth, and basically go through the deconstruction project and assume the liability for facilities removal. And the KRC would be governed by a board of directors that was made up of signatories from the KHSA. And those signatories were Yurok and Karuk, Oregon, California, Pacificor, a couple of the federal agencies, and some NGOs. Initially, the format was that we were going to move a bill through Congress and have Congress approve dam removal and also have Congress approve funds to support dam removal. This was, and as we were moving through this era, this was like 2012 through 2016, which was also the Tea Party era. And we couldn't get the bill through Congress. And so we had to amend the KHSA and pull the dam removal process away from Congress, put it back into FERC, and then also find funding, which came from bonds from the states of California and Oregon, and also from Pacificor. And so we amended the agreements in that way in 2016 and set forth on a new path. And I want to pause there because that's another teaching moment. In these large scale, projects, we could never accept no as an answer. Another thing former Vice Chair Myers always says is we got really good at failing. We tried so many different paths and all of them, none of them worked except for one, but that's all it takes, right? The other thing that I think is prudent is, we're in a time now where we're working with a different administration and we could run into problems. And on the Klamath, we encountered a political situation where Congress wasn't going to approve the settlement agreement as we had planned. And so we pivoted and came up with another path forward that allowed us to keep going. And so I think that's another lesson learned is get good at failing and figure out another solution, but never stop. And so as we, but then the fun continued. So then we went through FERC, and we kept going. And in 2020, we got an order from FERC that was inconsistent with the KHSA, and it required Pacificor to stay on the license, which was not a part of the plan. And Pacificor threatened to pull out of the deal. And UROC leaders, to their credit, they called Pacificor executives, top 2 executives, to the reservation, and they said, just come visit, let's talk about it. And to their credit, the Pacificor executives came. They took a private jet and came in, and this was also COVID, and so this was, a time when people weren't really traveling. But we promised we would just take them to the river. We would be outside. We were going to go up to Blue Creek and meet on really the tribe's most sacred lands and waters. Blue Creek is one of the main tributaries to the Klamath, and it's a cold water refuge for salmon, and it's also the entrance to the tribe's high country, and the water is blue and sacred and amazing and extremely powerful. And our UROC leaders, we have strategies, and we knew if we took them to Blue Creek and threatened to not take them back, that they'd agree. No, just kidding. we knew that if we took these leaders, these Pacificor executives from Kansas, out to Blue Creek, that the river would speak for itself. And we took them there, and the river spoke for itself. And as we understand, on the way home in their private jet, they were calling their lawyers, asking if the term sheet that we had provided them would be acceptable. And I'll never forget getting a call from this guy named Bill Furman, who's, a high-level Berkshire Hathaway employee, who called me the following Monday and said, Amy, I need a briefing. I need you to tell me everything about the KHSA, the liability protections, and let's get this going. We're going to take these dams out. And that was not the moment that I knew this would happen, because I knew this would happen back in 2002 when those fish were dying. Because I knew we had to create a different future. But I will admit that getting that call that Monday morning, I felt it was real. And so following that, we launched a whole 5-day briefing about liability protection, about our contractors, which we had already hired at that point, which were the best of the best in the world, many of whom you're going to hear from on the panel. And shortly after that, we signed an MOU that added another 45 million to dam removal and got us on our path forward. And then things went like this. The whole world started turning a little faster. In November of 2022, FERC approved dam removal. And in the image you saw in the Sizzler, where there were the people by the river holding up the phone, listening, crying, that was the moment on the river that, some of the most diehard Indigenous grassroots activists heard that FERC approved dam removal. Historic and wonderful moments that were rightly spent on the river. And then things just went. I'm not going to get into some of the real nitty-gritty details of what happened, because you're going to hear that from the panelists, but what I want to say is the first dam was out, completely out, COPCO 2 by September 2023. January 2024, the reservoirs were drawn down. We drew down over 2,200 acres of toxic blue-green algae-filled polluted reservoir water. We drew it down by blowing holes in the bottom of the remaining 3 dams and allowing them to gradually make their way down the river. Before that happened, I came in and I prayed to the river to let the river know that this is okay and that all this was happening for its benefit. Because at Yurok, we believe the river is alive and that it is an entity, just like a grandma or an auntie. And so to talk to it will help it. And also we can get strength back from it as well. And that drawdown period was a really sensitive time on the river because all of that bad stuff was being released. And I kind of think about it as like a triple bypass surgery where, you know, you're opening up the arteries of this very complex system and flushing things out so that it can be cleaner again. And what happened once we, just even doing the drawdown was remarkable because the river revealed herself. Instantly, she went back into this beautiful channel of a river and started to flow again. It was just remarkable. And then we removed more dams. So by, let's see, spring, we took down Copco 1. August 2024, we took down J.C. Boyle. And on September 30th, 2024, we removed Iron Gate Dam and reconnected the river for the first time in 100 years. And this was the most remarkable moment of probably my life, watching with colleagues and friends as the river reconnected and came back together to flow as it had done since millennium. And the power of the water, the power of the earth just gently moving away to allow that water to flow was so clear and so strong that it was obvious the water remembered exactly what to do and exactly what it had done for all that time prior to being dammed. It was obvious that it wanted to flow again. It was obvious that it was strong and so capable. Through the project, we removed over 441 feet of steel, rock, concrete, clay, and rebarb from those 4 dams. With Iron Gate alone, 1 million cubic yards of dam removal was removed in 25,000 truckloads with 40 yards holding capacity. Can you imagine? And what's even cooler was that much of this material was put back exactly where it came from. Much of it came from the mountains just immediately in the riparian areas of the river. And so they just put it back to be what it once was. Seeing all of this, I just cried. I just cried because I thought of my ancestors. I thought of the duty we have to the Creator. I thought of the potential for the future. And I just cried. And it was a huge historical release of inherited anger and trauma, everything that comes, you know, with that. Dam removal, remarkably, was completed on time, within budget, and consistent with all of our permits. And now the river runs free for 450 miles from my home village in Requoy all the way up to Keno Dam and soon even further. In October of 2024, the leader of those salmon that we saw earlier came through, and following it were thousands of salmon that went past the former project area into their historical spawning grounds. In a week alone, we spotted 5,000 salmon, and our technology isn't even able to collect or to see all of them. So there were thousands of salmon that went home and they spawned. They spawned. In June 2024, 2,800 acres around the former Copco land were returned to the Shasta tribe, the area's original inhabitants. Over 20,000 acres of the former hydroelectric project area will be restored through a multi-million dollar restoration project that DJ and the Yurok tribe are leading. In the Reservoir Reach area on over 2,200 acres, over 19 billion native seeds have been planted, and hundreds of thousands of trees and shrubs are already planted. And this is the work of Rez and the work of Yurok. My brother works on these crews, and already he is seeing the ecosystem restore itself. He's seeing the birds, the bears, the eagles, the deer, and sadly a few wild horses coming back into the ecosystem to make it whole again. This is world renewal. This is what my people believe in. This is what we are here to do. So the magnitude of this work is almost impossible to describe in words. That's why I wanted us to go through that exercise of clearing our minds of the path and allowing the future in, so that we can get out of the status quo, so that we can get out of our daily, Twitters and political theater and heartbreak, right? And move into and create space for light, create space for regeneration, right? So there is still so much more work to do. Dam removal is just the beginning, and there's so much to talk about. The future lies in getting more water in the river, returning to the natural hydrograph. It's updating agricultural practices so that we can live in balance again. It's following the river's lead and watching it as it shows us how and what it needs. It will show us what to do. Our duty is to accept our responsibility, all of us, to play a role in its rebirth, to play a role as a steward, and to watch it, observe it, to listen to it, and to let it tell us what it needs. The opportunity on the Klamath is not to collect data in some quantifiable, measurement. I acknowledge that's important, and I'm talking to a bunch of scientists. But what is most important is that you receive the gifts it offers you, which is one, this historical, remarkable opportunity to observe healing, its healing, and for it to guide you in your work, right? And to also accept the deep peace that comes when we restore nature, when we work with nature. That is the gift it can offer us. So I think all of this is essentially a pathway to peace. Having witnessed this historical effort, I believe that all humans have ancestral knowledge in our blood about what it was like to live on a healthy planet. And the medicine is still here. It's in you, it's in me, it's in all of us. And whatever your project is, whatever your it is, you can achieve it. And together we can restore the balance. We can renew the world. And in this way, the revolution on the Klamath becomes scalable and can be accomplished around the globe. So May the revolutionary healing of the planet and people be accomplished by one grant application at a time, one feasibility study at a time, one restoration project to the next, one first salmon to return home to spawn to the next, one freed river to the next, and from my heart to yours. May we all bear witness to the remarkable recovery of Mother Nature. Thank you. Wak lao, wak lao, wak lao. Oh. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Oh. Mm. Thank you. Thank you. I wish I was there to give y'all big hugs. Thank you. I really appreciate that. So I don't know if we have time for Q&A or if we need to run to the next panel. I'll let you all decide.
Okay, so if you can, Amy, can you hear me now too? I'm just standing aside on the mic. Okay. Wow, thank you so much. Yes, we do have some time. We're flexible inside the bounds of our couple sessions here. So no one will be late for break. We have lots of time. And so we have time for a handful of questions. So if folks from the room want to come up to the mic. I, of course, have a bunch of questions that I could just ask, but I'll give you guys first dibs on that. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Yeah, I don't think I've ever been to a conference that's actually brought me to tears. Super, super inspiring. So thank you for that. My question was about misinformation. There was a lot of misinformation that was happening around the Klamath Dam, and I'm just curious about your strategies to be able to manage that.
Thank you. Good questions. And I'm gonna take that opportunity to address another issue, which is sort of related, right? Like the misinformation really came from our opponents, and our opponents, I don't think we had people who were opponents. It was more ideas. It was the idea that in America, we build dams, right? We tame nature. We don't take them down. We don't restore nature. And so, in that way, it was almost like our enemy where it was ideals and status quo. And so they put misinformation out to basically try to discredit the success of dam removal. And we had a very, very strategic, very well implemented it was an ad hoc media committee that was made up of the KHSA stakeholders, so the tribes and states and some of the NGOs, and that group was very, very careful about how they communicated information, and also very proactive. So we tried to use the KRRC website as a source of accurate information, and we also tried to get ahead of things. So for example, one of the big sources of misinformation was around, when we drew down the reservoirs and there, of course, was, discharge into the river and the river got mucky. People were calling it the river of death. And so we tried to put accurate information up on the KRRC website and also on various social media posts in order to make sure that people had at least accurate information.
And follow-up question to that, with the incredible power of those returning fish, was there a distinct uptake of that by former opponents? Did they participate in that? And did that touch them, or are you still fighting battles?
Well, the worst of the worst was some people said that we had trucked them in and planted them. That was the extreme. But I think that shiny things and ugly media tends to get a lot of attention, but the saying, you get more from sugar than you do with spice, comes to mind. And so the strategy really has been to lean into all the accurate information and the good information and make sure that that's widely spread. And so that's how we've tried to approach it there. And I think there are still some opponents, people who are concerned about things. But I also think that's because it's change. And as soon as they see more of, like the salmon coming back, the former reservoir areas being restored, and more change happening, the more they'll settle into it.
I'm gonna go up here and ask one. Can you tell us more about Ridges to Riffles and what that organization is and what's been successful and what you're looking forward to with that group?
Thank you. I appreciate the question. So let's see. After Ridges to Riffles, Indigenous Conservation Group, we call ourselves R2R, was founded in 2020, but has sort of had several rebirths since then. And initially it came out of discussions with the Yurok tribe, because in 2020, things were awful on the river. We had terrible fish disease. We were unclear if dam removal was going to happen. And so the idea was to create a nonprofit that could focus and then have me transition from general counsel into this nonprofit, continue to provide legal representation to Yurok, but essentially bring funds and more sort of organizational support to support Klamath River restoration and elevate tribal voices through that process. In my mind, the big sort of concept is, in order to get different outcomes, we have to move money and power and organize in different ways. And so R2R came together in order to essentially, then the mission is to provide technical and legal services to tribes eventually across the country, to protect cultural natural resources. We've learned so much from the Klamath, and so we want to be able to help other tribes in other areas contribute in to massive restoration and to protection of cultural natural resources throughout the country. And so trying to create an entity where we can elevate tribal voices, we can help provide legal services, of course, but also we have fisheries biologists on staff. We have people with grassroots organizing experience. We have tribal people with media experience, and PR and communication, and so the idea is essentially to create a place where Indigenous-led conservation can thrive. We are also a sort of, I would say, sort of a way that tribes or other entities can help communicate with the tribes. In our experience, tribal entities, tribal governments often are bombarded with so many different levels of crises, and so sometimes it's hard to get the capacity to participate in a restoration project. And so the idea is that Ridges to Riffles can help facilitate conversations between maybe other NGOs or state officials and agencies, and help those tribes participate. So I appreciate the question. And also, I was really hoping to be there, and my colleague Molly Myers, who is a co-founder of R2R, we were planning to be there and would have loved to have met all of you and talked more about potential opportunities for partnering. So I'm sad we missed that, but I can be reached virtually through the Ridges to Riffles website, and I encourage all of you to reach out. Thank you for the question.
Thank you for reaching our hearts and bringing so much optimism. I have a question about who monitors and maintains the river, particularly since it's subject to upland activities that you may not have any um, purview over.
Excellent question. And you are absolutely right that the Klamath River is a multi-jurisdictional large basin. The lower 45 miles of the river is within the Yurok Reservation, and so the Yurok tribe has jurisdiction over the river and monitors very actively its own fishery, water quality, so on and so forth. But then there's the whole rest of the 325 miles of the basin now that we are all reconnected. And of course, the basin goes through California and then into Oregon. So that's another layer. There's a federal reclamation project. There are other tribes that don't have reservations, but still have some rights associated with the river. And so it's complex. And I think that's one of the biggest remaining problems that we still need to deal with on the Klamath, because what happens at the top of the river greatly impacts what happens at the bottom of the river, even more so now with the dams out. There are, and this kind of goes back to the theme of the talk, in that we're in this very new year zero of changing how we're going to manage the river. And that means that we have to put our management back together in a holistic way. And so we no longer can be separated by political boundaries and jurisdictional, arguments or whatnot. And so we're trying to work through collaborative processes. There's a few different groups that are working. We also have endangered species on the river. The coho salmon and many others are listed, sadly. And so those require, biological opinion implementation. And so there's management committees about that. So, that's the work that we're still doing. And that's the work that we're going to continue to need to really push on to maximize the benefits of dam removal. The monitoring piece, I'll let DJ speak to that. And also Rez, there's parts of the fisheries monitoring that's being done by various partners, including Yurok and Rez and Karuk. But we need to do more of it. And we need to make sure that, when I was talking during my talk about observing and listening, we need to make sure that we are on the water, on the river, listening and letting the animals, letting the ecosystem, the water show us what it's doing. And then we need to record that in a way that, and I understand there's got to be some quantifiable data, but there's also got to be a heart to it. And also an Indigenous lens. And so we're working right now to put together more comprehensive monitoring so that we can really capture this historical moment in time on the Klamath.
Okay, my friends, we're at time. Thank you so much. Please give one more round of applause to Amy.
Thank you guys. Enjoy. Take care.
Okay, so a couple logistics. I do think that for folks that are watching online, we're going to keep rolling the online session through. Hopefully you don't get to have to see me on the big screen and in person. But we will continue to roll that for the next 4 talks. So if you want to stay on, people on the internet, please do. As you heard, if we can do it on the Klamath, we can do it throughout the world. So the collective work in the Klamath is an inspiration that we can all draw on. And so the following 4 talks really get us into some of those details, from the logistics, construction, capacity building, compliance hurdles, looking forward, tributary restoration. All of those pieces are elements of this work. And so I'm going to start us off with, actually, let me do the logistics first. We're going to do 4 in a row, and then we'll have everyone come up to do a group Q&A for the last 10 minutes or so. So I'm going to start it off with Dan Chase, who is the Director of Fisheries and Aquatics for the Western region of RES. Prior to Res, Dan worked for 14 years as a fish and wildlife biologist, focusing on threatened and endangered species and their habitats in California. Please welcome Dan.
Good morning, everyone. I have to be honest with you, it's a bit of a surprise that I'm here. I got a call at the 11th hour from Dave Kaufman, who was originally going to give this talk, and he's sick, and he's not able to make it. And he told me I was going to be talking after Amy, and I'd be talking about the Klamath schedule, and I just about hung up the phone, because that's impossible. But here I am, and I appreciate you all being here as well. Here to talk about the Lower Klamath project. This has 4 hydroelectric dams that were built and completed between 1918 and 1962 that inundated and impounded over 2,200 acres of land that are spread out between 2 states and covering over 41 miles of river. Now, these dams were not built to provide agricultural or drinking water, and they do not provide flood control. What they did provide was hydroelectric power, but that represented less than 2% of Pacificor's energy portfolio. And with those dams being removed, over 21 miles of river and tributary habitat would reemerge, and over 400 miles of historic anadromous habitat would be reconnected into the Klamath River. Now, those numbers are impressive, but one thing that we found that was even more impressive and staggering for this past year was just the rate of change. We heard some of this from Amy, but literally 10 months changed the trajectory of the Klamath, after decades of battles and planning and hard work to get us to that point. And so I could spend some time walking through a Gantt chart or talking about this with different schedules, but I think what's a better way to spend this time is to see this in some of the images of how it transpired over the course of 2024. So for us to do that, we actually have to start 6 months before, in the summer of 2023. And this was a period when Kiewit Infrastructure West, the civil engineer company that was tasked with removing the dam structures, was beginning pre-construction activities. And as we heard from Amy, 2023 was also the start of dam removal. And you can see at the bottom of this picture, the small dam, Copco number 2. During the summer months, quietly and quickly, Kiewit was able to remove this structure. This was the first of the 4 dams to go. They're able to do this because there was no actual impounded area behind this dam. But this act started off dam removal and allowed the Klamath River to reflow through Ward's Canyon, reoccupying about 1.5 miles of channel that had been functionally diverted around for over a century. Now I'm going to draw your attention to the top of the image, and you see the large body of water behind it. That is the Copco Lake or Copco Reservoir area. And at the downstream end of that is Copco 1. And so with that, we're going to begin the journey for 2024. And we see that landscape scale change came quickly. There was a controlled and sequenced draining of 3 reservoirs throughout the project area. This time period was selected because the bulk of the water and the sediment that would mobilize from behind the reservoirs was going through the time period that was identified as the least impactful to the aquatic environment. Now, this is the winter months, and so rivers are typically carrying more sediment. There's many tributaries between Iron Gate and the Pacific Ocean along the 193 miles that the Klamath River runs that would also be contributing water and diluting conditions in the main stem. And biologically, this was the time period that was identified as least impactful to aquatic organisms. And principally for salmon and steelhead, this was a time when they would be in the tributaries with low main stem occupancy or out in the ocean. Now, as we continue into February, we see that revegetation efforts are well underway. Tribal-led crews were out hand-seeding hundreds of acres, and this was principally led by the Yurok crew with other tribal members from the basin. This was partnered with helicopter seeding, and combined, these 2 efforts dispersed over 66,000 pounds of native seed. Crews were also out hand-planting plants, trees, shrubs, and herbaceous plugs to the tune of over 78,000 plants, and got 27,000 acorns into the ground, just in the winter months alone. This was only the initial planting effort. There was much more of that to go, but as we know, that really gave us a great leg up on this revegetation work. As March rolls in, we start to see dam demolition take place. Now, all 4 dams had different demolition methods, and with Copco, as we heard, there was explosions. So there was a series of blasts that were called lifts that would remove between 30 or more feet of the dam surface. That would then fall to the downstream side where it would be broken up and then hauled out of the river. In April, the agency approved and targeted sediment evacuation work continued. Now, this was an effort with our crews and the Yurok Construction Company to help mobilize a substantial sediment delta that had formed at Jenny Creek. You can think back, there were 60 years or 6 decades of impoundment that occurred at this location, trapping sediment from over 250 square miles of a watershed. And this is all beneficial material. And so during this effort, crews were able to have Jenny Creek realign into its historic channel alignment, providing a more stable initial channel form, but also get almost 40,000 cubic yards of good sediment back into the river. These are sands, gravels, and cobbles, all of which are incredibly important to the aquatic ecosystem and had been functionally blocked by these dams. If we didn't do that effort, what would happen is later this year, that material would have been moved and stabilized into the uplands and would not be in there, back in the river. In May, we saw blooms. So the seeds that had been distributed in January and February had germinated, and we saw carpets of yellow and orange and green as poppies and lupins and fiddlenecks and native grasses, part of the over 100 species of plants that were planted back into the reservoir footprints, began to thrive. June saw dam removal activities in absolute full swing. 3 different footprints all underway, dedicated crews, hundreds of people out on the site, and dedicated equipment at each site. Different methods and different schedules for each dam, but everyone working together to meet the overall project objective. The reason that this project is so quick was because we needed to limit the impact on fish. And we see some of that in July. So this is J.C. Boyle, and in July we can see that the earth and embankment component of the dam has been removed, and the coffer dam has been breached, allowing the Klamath River to once again reflow through its historic alignment at this location. As we move downriver to Iron Gate, we see a little different situation. There's still a lot of earth left, but the crews are moving quickly. We heard from Amy that there was over 1 million cubic yards of material that made up the earth and embankment at Iron Gate. That's a massive amount of earth that needs to be moved. And you can see at the top of the picture, it was being moved from the channel to rebuild the mountaintop that had originally been taken from. This really was a choreographed parade of yellow iron and earth that we saw roll for several months at this location. And just for scale, that's a construction worker standing next to a Cat 775 haul truck. These would typically haul between 40 and 50 cubic yards of material, and there was over 25,000 hauls that were done to move Iron Gate out of the river. In August, we had large wood placed in about 2.5 miles of tributary habitat. This was helicopter-placed wood, about 200 pieces that were done in this initial effort, part of the over 900 trees that were harvested to provide habitat as part of the restoration work here. As we zoom in, we can see Spencer Creek, and this is our Oregon restoration footprint. It's about 700 feet in length, and we see July, followed by August, and we had about 53 pieces of wood with root wads attached that were placed here. Now, this cover that was placed provided an instant habitat uplift to this formerly inundated area, and we saw fish respond quite quickly. We'll have a little bit more on that in this talk and in my colleague Caitlin's later this morning, but it was, as we've heard before, if you build it, they will come. Continuing our march through the calendar year, we come to September, which was truly a month of milestones. At this point, all 3 dams had been removed. The channel footprints at those dam locations were being rebuilt, and then the coffer dams had been breached, allowing the Klamath River for the first time in over a century to flow unimpeded to the ocean. And starting in October, we actually came to the end of the dam removal activities. 10 months after it started, we see the J.C. Boyle location here in Oregon. A look at that before in 2023, and then again in October. Moving downriver to the newly emerged Copco Valley and the location of the former Copco 1 dam footprint. We see before and after. And if you were a fish that was in the Klamath River in January of 2024, this was your view, and this was the end of the road. And 10 months later, the gates were wide open, and this is what you saw. And as we heard and we know, the fish did see that, and they moved past. This is a photo of one of the first observed spawning pairs of Chinook salmon that were observed upstream of Iron Gate. It was taken by Swiftwater Films about a week after the formal conclusion of dam removal activities. But there's more. There's much more work to do, and there's more work on this project. We're continuing with tributary restoration work that will move through 2025. And in November, crews are out collecting data, doing site walks with Yurok Construction Company, and doing agency walks to be able to progress the restoration designs, to continue the pace of change here, and to get ready for the construction work in the tributaries that will occur later this summer. But the year also ended with some other encouraging news. In December, we started to see coho salmon return to their historic habitat upstream of Iron Gate. Now that was quick, and I hope it felt quick because 2024 was quick. And I wanted to say that RES's role in this project is the restoration contractor, and we are responsible for the long-term monitoring and maintenance as part of the ecological restoration component. But we are only one of many, many that have been involved with this massive effort. All work has been done underneath the Klamath River Renewal Corporation with Macmillan as their client representative, and Kiewit Infrastructure West was a civil engineer tasked with and the responsibility of removing the dams. But most importantly, what we have heard from Amy is that, and what we have known on our end, is that there has been, this project could not happen but for the vision and the dedication, the commitment of the tribal community in the Klamath Basin. Personally, and for all of us at RES, I can't thank the tribal community enough for their support in teaching us, helping us understand that this is a can't-fail project, helping us understand the importance of place and how to do this work the right way. And our work from the beginning has been close with the Yurok construction, with the Yurok, with the Karuk, with the Klamath tribes, and we continue also now with the Shasta Indian Nation, and we will continue to do that work as we go forward. With that, I will say thank you. I appreciate your time. To those that are interested in following along with the restoration, I would direct you to a story map that we have available here. And here's to the Klamath.
All right, DJ Bandrowski leads the multidisciplinary, and I heard it called world-class design and technical services program within the Yurok Tribe's Fisheries Department. His group plans, designs, implements large-scale ecosystem restoration projects in Northern California, and it's throughout Klamath River, Trinity, Sacramento, and I can't wait to hear DJ's part about this story. Please come on up.
Thanks, Caitlin. I just wanted to give a quick shout out to Amy. Amazing words. I know that she impacts whenever she talks. I know impacted me. I know impacted all of you. And the work that she and many others are doing is incredible. I also wanted to give a quick shout out to our project partners. RES especially has embraced the tribe, not just the Yurok tribe, but other tribes in the basin to help support this work, to include Indigenous community into the actual doing of this work. And that's huge. And so we continue that effort. And I'll be talking a little bit about the work that we've been doing with some of the data collection. But it would be remiss not to give this tribute to those that have gone before us. Amy talked about this. Tribal leaders that have worked tirelessly for 2 decades, including Amy, but many tribal leaders across the basin other tribes that have fought for the removal, that wouldn't say no, that had the tenacity to never give up. And that's a call out to us as practitioners to never give up. And so I dedicate this to them. But this presentation isn't about protests and looking back. It's a looking forward. And river restoration, we talk a lot about data, and of course that's all important, and I'm going to be talking about some of that. But it's about, but any important story has important people. And river restoration is more about people and their the relationship that they have with the community in this place and rivers. And so this is about the next generation that's embracing new technology, new tools, trying to understand how to carry this forward as stewards of the landscape. And so these are some of the images of Yurok tribal citizens that work for the fisheries department that are now taking, not holding banners, but holding survey equipment and doing monitoring and analysis. The Klamath River, you saw these pictures, but what I wanted to point out is the intense area of work that this includes. The Yurok tribe, as Amy pointed out, reservation is the lower 40 miles, but this basin stewardship is, as Amy pointed out, is the responsibility of the tribes across the entire basin, across the continuum. And what Yurok leaders would describe is the Klamath River is really a lifeblood of their people, and the salmon are their ancestors, and so their connection and their commitment to this is dedicated into like their whole being. And so this is important work. And you look at these dams, and without removing them, and without salmon coming back, they would cease to be who they are. And so these are just a couple more pictures of the before and afters. As Dan pointed out, this incredible work I want to go back to that. That blue-green algae in the top right corner is incredible, and to be able to flush that away, as Amy pointed out, was amazing. This is another photo before and after of the Capco 1 dam. And but I would be remiss not to recognize those that have gone before us. Elwha Dam Removal, there were so many lessons learned. I was up there in 2009, and one of the things that we heard from the people that were leading some of that effort was data collection early. You can't do it soon enough. And so we learned that lesson. Guys like Andy Ritchie was strapping cameras to aircraft, doing photogrammetry and trying to piece together puzzles. We said, we got to do this. We got to follow in these footsteps, but we got to learn lessons from those that have gone before us. And so it's a shout out to them. In 2018, the Yurok tribe, along with many partners, collected really important baseline data that would help support change over time dynamics, understanding the trajectory of the Klamath, and but it didn't stop there. We decided, as Amy pointed out, Yurok tribe leaders think big, and they are continuing to build capacity. And so in 2023, right before Capco 2 was removed, we took ownership of a new aircraft and developed a whole geospatial program to not just to collect data, but to continue the stewardship and embracing the technology across the basin for the next generations to understand the change on the Klamath. This is a picture right before drawdown in January 2024. This is, again, a shout out to the homeland of the Shasta Indian Nation. This is all now going back to them. This is a before picture, and I'm going to just give you some. This is these imagery was taken from that Cessna 208 Grand Caravan with dual collecting LiDAR and imagery. So here's January 2024. This is February 2024. A couple of statistics for those that want to geek out on imagery. And here's April 2024. as drawdown was completed. We were doing surveys continuously. We've collected both LiDAR and imagery, as I mentioned, and we're utilizing that information to help understand these changes. Here's a hillshade digital terrain model taken from the LiDAR that is being used to support all kinds of different components, as Dan mentioned, restoration in the tributaries, future restoration projects up above the reservoirs. It's an important piece of how we understand and how we move forward with the next phase of dam removal. And literally, Yurok tribe citizens, after collecting that data, were digitizing the new banks of a free-flowing river. And, you know, we have new engineers and geologists, fisheries biologists, all working for the tribe, doing this work, but literally their hands digitizing these river lines. And that's incredible, and it's a tribute to them. We're using 3D models, doing geospatial differencing to understand those, looking at how much sediment has moved. We're just starting that work. This is that top image is a 3D mesh model of some of the data that we collected pre-dam removal, and we're doing that. Of course, we've done that through the entire year. This is some before and after looks from the 2018 data set that we have from Sonar, looking at the 2024 data, doing those comparative analysis to understand how much sediment has moved. We're just starting those DTMs of difference tasks. The next piece is to do the bathymetry. I'll talk about that in a minute, but we're also integrating new satellite imagery from Planet Labs to in between our flights in the aircraft, embracing that technology as well. And again, really trying to capture and understand the nuances in these areas. These are just snapshots of Copco, the new Copco Valley, which is an incredible place to see, seeing the changes that are happening real time. It's hard to keep up with those changes, and so this is just some of the bathymetry that we collected there. And our crews are literally on the water right now, in catarafts and rafts and other equipment, collecting bathymetry, stitching the digital terrain models from the terrestrial LiDAR with the bathymetric conditions, and so that we can really tell that full story. And it's going to continue. Like these are just snapshot in time, but as we learned from the LWA, the change dynamics is going to occur over a decade, and we have crews made up of Yurok people that are literally going to help do that, as well as other tribes and partners with RES and others in the basin. But this data is going to be also used to help inform the next dam removal for the next sciences, everything from hydraulic modeling and habitat models to vegetation and sediment dynamics, et cetera. So these tools that we're learning and we're gaining on the Klamath are going to be what hopefully we can pass on to that torch to the next dam removal, maybe the lower Snake River dams. But the data is also being used to do restoration. And the next step is, I just want to do a shout out. Stantec and RES are working on tributary restoration designs. This LiDAR data and the imagery are being used by their teams right now to finalize the plan sets that will be used this summer as we go to construction for the next phase of restoration. And then Nell will be talking a little later about the prioritization for not just the Klamath River Renewal Corporation footprint of operations, but the next phase of operations in those upper basins in places like Shovel Creek and other tributaries. And so we're integrating all of this work together. And it's also been used to help look at the revegetation complexities, help understand where during those operations where we can plant, where it was too wet. How the vegetation was recovering, and so here's some of the statistics that Dan pointed out in his talk. I'm not going to get into all of the statistics right now, but here's some great pictures of some of the native vegetation that Yurok and RES crews help implement. But what Amy pointed out to us, and I think what she left with us, is that it takes the interaction between people and the landscape as caretakers, as stewards, to do this work. And it's not about just doing the work, it's about, the relationship with the land and listening to the river and listening to the landscape. And these are some of the folks that are out there doing that. And I think this is a quote from Amy. It's if you've never seen the documentary, A River Between Us, it's an older documentary about the Klamath River and the fight to get to yes. And Amy is featured in that movie, and she sings in that movie. And if you want to see another side of that, she's incredible in there. But she said when the river is restored, the people will be healed, and our work is just beginning. And so here's some images of Copco Valley from this fall. And with that, we're going to do questions later, but thank you.
Our third speaker is Caitlin Boyce, who's an aquatic ecologist, and her work focuses on the water quality and quantity. Currently, Caitlin is the water quality technical lead for RES on the Klamath River Renewal Project. Please welcome Caitlin.
Good morning. I'm really excited to be here to talk to you about building and implementing a comprehensive fisheries and aquatics monitoring program for Klamath Dam Removal. But what that really means is this is the story of how that program collected data that was able to support adaptive management that played this role in returning fish to reaches of the Klamath River they had not been able to access for over 100 years. And they're pointed out there. I know it can be hard to see on the screen, but take a look at those beautiful fish in that river. So this is the Klamath River, and these are the locations of the former dams along that river. As Dan mentioned, this is about 41 river miles of habitat. And this is where the bulk of RES's fish passage and fish presence monitoring is occurring on the project. And these are the locations of our water quality monitoring. So you can see these span from all the way above the former J.C. Boyle Dam down to the Klamath Estuary. And this is over 230 miles of river to monitor. And this data collection is being driven by over a dozen regulatory authorizations related specifically to aquatics and fisheries, like the 401 water quality certifications for both the states of California and Oregon, and the biological opinion for the project issued by National Marine Fisheries. And all of this requires this extensive monitoring program that I'm going to talk about today. And at a high level, this is really wrapped up in continuous data collection at telemetered stations like the one seen here. If any of you have used USGS data in the past, this is really just a USGS station that we're monitoring for the project, as well as grab samples of water, so all to create kind of a holistic picture of what water quality conditions look like in the river. And that is connected with fish passage and fish presence monitoring, mainly within that former hydroelectric reach. And all of this data collection gets wrapped up into regular monthly and annual reporting to our tribal and agency partners. But even more important than that, in my view, is kind of the real-time sharing of this data, especially during dynamic conditions on this project. And hopefully, from the previous presentations, you've seen that some of those conditions were very dynamic. But as another example, here is a picture of Iron Gate Reservoir in January of 2024, right before drawdown was initiated. And here's that same spot just a month later in February, and a few months later in June. So during this 6-month period, conditions were changing really rapidly on the ground. And RES was responsible for providing real-time updates to tribal and agency partners on both fish observations in the lower river and these dynamic water quality conditions that were unfolding. And during this time, there was the potential that management actions like the capture and relocation of fish were going to be recommended in the downstream reaches based on the metrics that we were reporting back to tribes and agencies. Fortunately, those conditions didn't arise, so we didn't end up having to move fish. but we did develop this really effective and clear way for sharing conditions with agency and tribal partners, which came in handy as the project progressed. And I'm going to dive a little bit more deeply into how this played out during the Iron Gate Dam cofferdam breach. So the cofferdam was the final barrier in place at Iron Gate, and you can see it here. It was actually used in the construction of the dam. So it routes flow through a low-level outlet tunnel through the bank on the left side of that picture, and it kept the channel dry while they constructed the dam. We were using it in the same way for dam deconstruction, so routing water around the channel while the deconstruction work progressed. And the final piece of restoring a free-flowing river was breaching that cofferdam. And now during the initial breach at the end of August in 2024, we saw water quality impacts at our monitoring locations, and this included reduced dissolved oxygen at that monitoring location immediately downstream. And it became apparent that because of the construction of the cofferdam and the low-level outlet tunnel, an area of slow water had been created kind of upstream of that cofferdam that had allowed all of this really fine sediment, including dead algae from those blooms we saw in pictures previously, to settle out. And so when the cofferdam was breached, that material was flushed downstream, contributing to dissolved oxygen impacts. And so here's what that looked like. This is a plot of dissolved oxygen right at the station immediately downstream of the cofferdam. We know that aquatic organisms need oxygen, and we commonly measure that as dissolved oxygen in milligrams per liter. And the less dissolved oxygen, the less the positive outcomes for aquatic species. And so this was what resulted from that initial breach of the cofferdam. We see low levels, fluctuations at low levels for a couple days, and actually even some missing data as our sensor became buried and had to undergo some maintenance to get work done. But I showed on my map that we had a really extensive monitoring program. So we can look at the station immediately downstream 30 river miles and see while there was an impact to dissolved oxygen there, it was not as severe and the recovery was a lot faster. So we have this kind of area of more intense impact that we're now keeping track of. But the question became, as this initial breach gets widened, as more material is removed, as the channel kind of takes its more final form, and this residual pool upstream continues to be drained and more of that fine material gets flushed out, how do we minimize impacts? And so this was a period, this was late summer, early fall, when water temperatures are already pretty warm, dissolved oxygen is already pretty low, and adult fish are starting to make their way upstream to spawn. And we were able to provide real-time data paired with construction schedules, as well as estimates of things like sediment load, to help provide recommendations about kind of the pace and timing and how the ongoing work would play out. And not only that, we were then able to monitor the effects of those recommendations, so see how construction pacing and timing contributed to water quality impacts as we went through the remainder of this work. And the outcome of that was really successful. As work continued through the remainder of September, we did not see another large drop in dissolved oxygen, and we were really, really happy about that. As we moved into the final work to remove the cofferdam, we have another example of some of the dynamic river conditions. So you'll see another drop in dissolved oxygen here. That started around 3 in the morning. No construction crews were on site. When we were finally able to get eyes on it, it became clear that some upstream bank stabilization issues had occurred, causing kind of a flush of sediment from that downstream. But when the final work to remove the cofferdam did happen, a little bit later in the day, not at 3 in the morning, we see a small drop in dissolved oxygen, but nothing compared to what had occurred at the end of August during that initial breach. So this work to pair the data with the construction, keep an eye on conditions, was really successful in providing this positive outcome. But as we've seen through all of this, the most important outcome of all has been the return of fish to reaches of the Klamath River that they have not been able to access in over 100 years. And here's some really great pictures of them spawning. And our primary objective with the fisheries monitoring is to inform volitional fish passage throughout the Lower Klamath Project footprint. So are fish able to access these newly reopened habitats, or is there project impact that's keeping them from doing so, such as sediment deposition or anthropogenic debris? And a lot of partners are conducting this monitoring using different methods ranging from sonar stations to video weirs. We're collecting a lot of eDNA to track the return of fish to these new habitats. And we're really trying to compile all of this data so that our project partners can see how this has played out. And this map shows some of those returns, but we're going to dive into a few of the firsts that happened in terms of fish return on the project. So the cofferdam, the final removal occurred at the end of September, and on October 2nd, in-water work was complete. So this is all equipment out of the river for dam deconstruction. Between the cofferdam breach and in-water work being complete, Pacific lamprey were detected in Jenny Creek, so some of our first returning fish. On October 3rd, just a day after in-water work was complete, the first Chinook passed Iron Gate. That was captured on a sonar station. On October 15th, Chinook were detected in Jenny Creek spawning. And just 2 weeks after in-water work was complete, fish were detected in Spencer Creek in Oregon, having traversed the entirety of the Lower Klamath Project footprint. Like Dan mentioned, 2024 went fast and the fish went faster. And in December, we had the return of coho to Beaver Creek and detection of coho spawning in Oregon. And so what are some of the lessons learned and outcomes of all of this? For me, it's really that data is what you make of it. It is so much easier, not easy, but easier to collect large amounts of data and do nothing with it than it is to take the time and collaboration to make it useful to you and your project partners. And this is especially true when it comes to real-time data that you're using for critical decision making. So, for our water quality program, over the course of a couple years, we collected over 600,000 data records. And without taking the time to see how are all of those parameters interacting, how do conditions look on the ground when we actually are seeing this spike in data, it wouldn't have been as useful to us for this process. And all of this and the adaptive management it was able to support brings us to, again, the most important outcome, which is the main project goal that fish have been detected traversing the entirety of the Lower Klamath Project. So I have the same QR code here. If you didn't catch it the first time, it's more to the story than we could ever tell up here today. And I want to highlight the Karuk tribe, the Yurok tribe, the Klamath tribes, and USGS, who have all played really important roles in all of this monitoring, and leave you with this beautiful picture of fish returning to the Klamath River. Thank you.
Our fourth panelist in this conversation is Nell Scott, who is the director of Trout Unlimited in Klamath program. Nell has worked in habitat restoration on the Klamath Basin, for 12 years, and she gave me a fun fact, which is that she co-owns a pizza restaurant with her husband, and they have been voted the best pizza in Klamath Falls for 9 years running. So please welcome Nell.
Thank you so much, Caitlin, and thank you, everybody. This is such an honor to be able to wrap up this session. And a lot of my initial talk is sort of based around why this work is so important. Like all of us, like this is incredibly important work. And then you follow Amy, who's just makes you feel how incredibly more important than you even thought this work was. And I kind of wish I could start every workday with just like a pep talk from Amy to like remind me why we go to work and why we do this. So I am going to talk about when anadromy returns, and most of my career has been spent working in the Upper Klamath Basin, and we talk a lot about when anadromy returns. We put it in grant applications. This project is for these species, but it could also provide important habitat when anadromous fish return to the Klamath Basin after dam removal. So first I'm gonna go back to the map, and this is looking at kind of the Oregon side of the Klamath River, and it's a continuation of what Caitlin was talking about with fish returns. So again, just talking about why this work matters. The fish are coming back, and this is incredibly exciting. So in the middle of your screen there is the J.C. Boyle Dam site, and then this is data from ODFW, collected by ODFW and the Klamath tribes, and it is just showing the return of salmon, the numbers of salmon that have come back that they've counted in these upstream reaches. So in this reach between basically the state line and the J.C. Boyle Dam site, there's been a max count of 93 Chinook salmon, and that was in November. And then as we move further upstream, still on the main stem Klamath, upstream of the J.C. Boyle Dam site, max count of 88 Chinook salmon. Oh, and then there were also coho downstream of J.C. Boyle Dam, which was pretty exciting. None of those coho have been tracked upstream of J.C. Boyle Dam yet, but we really expect in future years to see that based on how fast they've come back so far. And then we move into Spencer Creek, which is the highest tributary in this reservoir reach, this dam removal reach, and a max count of 182 Chinook salmon came up into Spencer Creek, and that max count was in early November. Even the most optimistic fish biologists and excited thinkers did not think that fish were going to make it all the way up into Spencer Creek the first year. This basically blew everybody away. And so this is just why this is so exciting. So this is me on a rainy day in late October of last year going out to try to catch my first glimpse of a Chinook salmon in the basin where I've worked for my whole career. I thought it would be hard. I was like, oh, I've heard people are seeing them, but I don't know if I'm actually going to be able to see one. And I went out there, and I was trying to sneak up on the river and not scare anything. And all of a sudden, these giant Chinook salmon just start flopping their way up in the shallow water. They don't care about me. I don't have to sneak up on them. They're just doing their thing. And I have only been here for a decade, and I can't even imagine what the people who have been working on this for decades have feel, what the tribal members who have been working on this for their entire life and how important this is to them. So this is what keeps us going. And I think, I was coming into this day kind of burnt out on work, feeling a little like I'd been to too many meetings. And it was just a reminder that this is what we have to do to remind ourselves why this work matters. So now that I've used most of my time just being excited, I'll go into what I'm talking about and see if I can get through it. But so back to our map, just to give another layout, the lower Klamath River is downstream of all the dams. We've heard a lot about the habitat there. The Upper Klamath is upstream of the dam removal reach. And I could spend an entire day talking about the habitat in the Upper Klamath. These dam removals are opening up over 450 miles of habitat for fisheries. This Upper Basin has incredible cold water spring-fed creeks that will provide incredible climate refugia for these fish as they come upstream. One interesting fact I'll just point out about the Upper Klamath Basin and the Klamath Basin as a whole is that it's sometimes described as kind of an upside-down basin. You see this is a longitudinal profile flowing the same direction as the map, and the lower portion is really mountainous, it's really steep, it's really remote, it's really rugged. There's not a whole lot of agricultural impacts through that main stem Klamath. And then the Upper Basin is very flat, it's high desert, it has a lot of wetlands, it has huge, as Amy said, the reclamation project with water projects and agriculture, but also incredible habitat potential. So this is just sort of the context that we're working in. And you may notice that there's that in-between reach, and this is what I'll focus the rest of the time on, is that this in-between reach was obviously incredibly important for dam removal, but there really hadn't been any focus on tributary restoration or other restoration activities within this sort of middle watershed, because the dams were there. They blocked passage upstream and downstream, and there really wasn't a whole lot of money or effort being put into that reach. Not that there wasn't any effort, but it was very minimal. And so the Lower Klamath project that you've heard about is really the dam removal and then the restoration of those reservoir footprint areas and the tributaries that are within those reservoir footprint areas. But there's lots of habitat outside of those reservoir footprint areas, both on smaller tributaries and on the main stem Klamath on the reaches between the reservoirs. So we basically put together a restoration and prioritization plan for that reach. And what I'm going to go back to now is the timeline of dam removal. It's been covered a few times, so I'm really just putting it up here for reference. But basically, pre-2018, lots and lots and lots of work. Massive simplification to say complex legal negotiations, 2018 to 2020, about sort of the very, very final approvals coming through in the fall or in the December of 2022. Pre-drawdown work, as you heard described, in 2023, and then dam removal occurring in 2025. So I'll also put on this timeline fish returning dam removal in 2024, fish returning in late 2024. Adding to this, just for more context, is a couple of large funding pots that came through for restoration work, the BIL funding in late 2021 and then IRA funding in late 2022. Those had huge investments in the Klamath specifically and were really important for not dam removal activities, but other restoration activities throughout the Klamath Basin. So then I'm going to put another timeline down, and this is basically the planning process that went into the restoration and prioritization plan for that in-between reach around dam removal. So NOAA Fisheries had this idea in 2018 to do a prioritization plan for that reach. And they then spent about a year kind of shopping that around, finding funding. In 2019, they were able to secure funding. They looped Trout Unlimited into that process, and so that's how I got involved. And then in 2020, we had grant agreements put together. We started the planning process, involved field surveys and desktop analysis to produce a report in December of 2022, the same month that those very final approvals for the dam removal came through. And so we were able to have in hand an incredibly detailed report of restoration projects and activities that need to happen in that reservoir reach to make sure that it is in as good of habitat quality as possible. So then in 2023, we started securing funding with our partners, with the UROC, with NOAA Fisheries, and with other groups to implement some of these projects that had been identified. In 2024, we started on some of those designs, and then some of those projects are actually going to construction in 2025. So this is really matching up quite nicely to really build on that momentum of dam removal. And so now I'm going to do a hypothetical where what if NOAA, the staff at NOAA hadn't had that idea, or they had been too nervous to commit the funding to it, even though it was a small investment, but hey, dam removal might not happen. Is it really worth putting all this planning effort in? So say they have the idea, we go through the same process. We still work really hard to get this report out as fast as possible, but it doesn't get published until 2026. That means that we're not going to secure funding until 2027 and maybe starting construction in 2029. I'm going to go out on a limb and say none of that's going to happen because the moment has passed. Nobody cares about the Klamath anymore. We care about the Klamath. Everybody who's there cares a lot about the Klamath. Maybe you guys care about the Klamath because we come back and we do some more presentations. But the funding sources have moved on to another basin. The interest, the national, excitement has moved on, and it's really hard to get meaningful, large investments in 2027 once, 3 years after the dams have come out. So this is just, I'll rush through this. This is sort of the nuts and bolts of the plan. Basically, it had these components. I'm incredibly impressed that we were able to do it in the time that we did, and I think what that speaks to is how important it was and how we knew that this was time sensitive and we have to get out there and do this as fast as possible. And I think when your work really matters and when you know your work really matters everybody steps up to the plate and really makes it happen. And it's really exciting to be a part of that. We had a complex technical advisory panel that also knew this work really mattered, so they responded really quickly, and they really helped us develop basically 82 specific restoration projects, 70 fish screening projects, and 38 flow restoration projects that we could do in this reach. Probably the most specific restoration plan I've ever been a part of putting together. A lot of them are more vague, and you have priority watersheds. This really gave us a playbook to go get funding and make sure that this work could actually occur. There's a couple projects that are going to construction in the next year or two that we're really excited about. A passage barrier on Spencer Creek that we know the fish are already back there, and we also know that habitat upstream looks like this. This is incredible. We want to get fish to that habitat. We don't want that barrier in the way of that habitat. So that's something that's going to be really fun. Shovel Creek, the Yurok tribe has received a large amount of funding from NOAA Fisheries to start doing some large-scale restoration on Shovel Creek, which is also an important tributary in California. This is a picture from the 80s or early 90s of some of the manipulations that have happened in Shovel Creek in the past. This has happened all over the country, but we actually have a photo of it, and that's resulted in incised channels, lack of floodplain connectivity, and there's a lot of work that's going to be done there. And then in Jenny Creek, you saw pictures of the fish returning to Jenny Creek. There's actually a concrete barrier in Jenny Creek that you might think in another place would have been taken out ages ago, but we haven't had the impetus to do that. So now we are, and we're really excited about getting this work done. So my take-home message is funding follows a plan, and when you have a really detailed plan, you can really get people excited about that. Thank you so much. Really appreciate the time.
Thank you so much to our panelists. We have 10 minutes for Q&A for everyone, so I'd love it if we had a couple questions. I'm going to take a couple from the room. Yes, I love this excitement. Okay, let's go. Judy, take it away. Oh, Andy's coming.
Okay, thank you so much for being here. I'm so grateful to Amy for joining us today. She's not still on, is she, Ken? Anyway, I first learned about the Klamath Dam removals in this very room, in the before times, and I was really looking forward to hearing about this in the after times, after the dam removals and after all the other things that happened, and I'm looking forward to hearing about it continually as the removals happen. My question is kind of going back to one of the early questions that someone asked Amy about communications. When I look at your maps and I see those two remaining dams, just upstream Keno and Link River, for communication's sake, it'd be great if you address those. And I think I remember from the earlier talk that they're not as much a barrier, or there's fish passage for them, and one of them's got a natural dam. So I wonder if you could just spring on us a little bit about how that area is still accessible to the fish, even though there are still dams on it.
I could start on that. Jump in. So the Link River Dam is the most upstream dam on the Klamath River, and it is technically called the Link River at that point. It controls the elevation of Upper Klamath Lake, which is a natural lake, but they built the dam to be able to both raise the level of the lake, store more water for agricultural irrigation, and then also lower the level of the lake further just to be able to pull a little bit more water out of it. So it controls the level, but it is a natural lake. That dam does have a fairly modern fish passage on it, and is expected to not be an impediment to fish once they get up to Link River Dam. Keno Dam is downstream of that, and it has two functions. It has agricultural irrigation withdrawals, but it also was supposed to have hydropower, which was never actually functional. But it does, the reason those dams, the reason Keno was not included in the Lower Klamath project was that because it provides agricultural water, it has a different function, and it doesn't fit in with the rest of the dams in terms of the arguments for taking them out. There is a fish ladder on Keno Dam. It is not up to snuff. It needs to be better, and there's a lot of funding already allocated, and there's lots of groups working on making that better. We all wish that had happened years ago, but through some complex ownership issues and stuff like that, that just hasn't happened. The most upstream confirmed sightings of Chinook salmon in the basin this fall were in the Keno Dam fish ladder. That doesn't mean that they definitely didn't make it upstream of the Keno Dam fish ladder, but there were no confirmed sightings of them upstream of the fish ladder. So there's a lot of work to work on that fish ladder. There are also talks about the future of Keno Dam and what it looks like and how it should be managed and if it should be changed at all. But those are kind of the long-term talks, and then the fish ladder is really the critical infrastructure that needs to be fixed to make sure that the Upper Basin can be accessed.
Can you speak to the geomorphic context of these reservoir settings? I thought the res strategy of planting immediately after drawdown was quite interesting from an ecological perspective, but I wonder how that will interplay with the continued geomorphic evolution of those channels, which will continue to be dynamic for the next few years. What are your expectations, and what do you know so far?
Sure. So I can address some of that. So these, they place the dams in a good location for dams. These are typically valley or canyon sections, and so there was a lot of elevation change within the footprints of the former reservoirs. And so we have a lot of steep terrain out there, and we have a handful of tributaries. And so that's what we're prioritizing, the tributary restoration within. And so as far as the geomorphic change continues in those, we're monitoring it. We've got restoration activities. We expect a lot of planting and replanting to occur as those channels evolve and develop, and we're trying to balance a combination process-based while accelerating the habitat value and the connection through, because these fish really don't have decades to have the processes fully play out, and so we're trying to accelerate their ability to move through that habitat into the connected habitat outside of it. And be able to utilize and maximize the miles of tributary within the footprint. Going back to revegetation, there was the completion of the winter and then a fall planting window. The fall planting window just kind of wrapped up in December, and so those are helping to get a lot of native plants out on the landscape. But we have probably another 2 years of planting efforts ahead before we move into just kind of the monitoring and maintenance to make sure that those are establishing the way that we expect. And so there is still a lot of evaluation of conditions, checking to see how things are performing. Maybe some of you have seen the videos on the reservoir revegetation work and those PEDs, those like former reservoir sediments that are really pretty nasty and form these columns of almost impenetrable material. There's good organics that can be generated from there, and so we had farm equipment that was out, kind of breaking that up and kind of preparing the seed beds for planting in the areas that they could access over the course of kind of the summer and the fall. So it's dynamic, but we're trying to accelerate the recovery with a lot of intention to reduce sediment input into the river and to be able to provide improvement to water quality quickly. I think there was about a 24-month period where it's expected that water quality conditions would transition from impacts associated with the dam removal to what would be considered the new baseline, the new norm. So I don't know, DJ, if there's anything you want to add to that.
I guess the only thing I would say is, unlike the Elwha, for example, where there was a major sediment supply upstream, the Link River and, and there's other dams, they provide that sediment trap still. And so, and because of the geology, you know, the upside down river, and it's a, you know, essentially a large wetland complex at the top of the basin, that, you know, the sediment dynamics and the change over time is going to be a little different than you would see like somewhere on the Elwha, where it's like rapidly changing and like these major shifts. I think we're going to see more stability. We're seeing that in some of the plan form right now, looking at like that 2018 sonar survey and the reservoirs to the 2024 LiDAR surveys. It's, you know, it's changing, but not changing to the rate that, like, you know, people might expect like on the Elwha or something. So hope that helps.
All right. Amazing work, you all, and to the tribes. It just really, you know, touches the heart and spirit. So I just want to share that. And I want to ask a follow-up question about sediment and vegetation monitoring. One on the sediment is, Dan, in your presentation, you presented that the sediment was redeposited on the riparian areas, and kind of, I was just curious about if you had to mitigate for the composition of the sediment, if it was toxic. We deal with that a lot in the urban setting. I work in Seattle. I was just curious about that. And then the follow-up question is, are you using remote sensing for vegetation monitoring too? Oh, like MDVI.
Great. To speak to the water toxicity question, and I'll let Caitlin jump in on this as well. There was really extensive testing that was done over multiple administrations to evaluate the conditions in the reservoir sediments, and they found that there was the conditions were suitable to allow that sediment to be able to free flow out to the Pacific Ocean. That wouldn't have to be trucked or have any sort of remediation work done for that, you know, for the dam removal. There was a elaborate water quality monitoring program that was set up that actually also tracked conditions through, and you know, the conditions that were observed all fell within what was monitored and or what was which was projected to occur. As far as the deposition goes, you know, we did see sediment deposition that occurred in different locations, but a lot of this material, this isn't like the bed load, and DJ alluded to this wasn't a lot of alluvial material that was moving around. It was a lot of fines, so silts, clays, and principally organics. I think over 80% of the material in the reservoirs were of that nature. And so the material that mobilized during the drawdown largely stayed in suspension all 193 miles out to the Pacific Ocean. So we weren't seeing big deposits of sands and gravels. That's part of the reason that at Jenny Creek, that was really important to get that material back into the river system as opposed to moving it into the uplands and stabilizing it, because that is a valuable resource through this part of the Klamath.
Yeah, just want to add to that going off of the question earlier about misinformation, is that there was a lot of talk about heavy metals in the river that you all saw probably earlier last year. And the Klamath is naturally really rich in heavy metals. It has a lot of aluminum, and that we see that, and we've seen that kind of in all of the areas that are tested. That's just because of the volcanic nature of the system. And as Dan mentioned, there were a lot of EPA tests and sediment cores taken, and it was determined that it wasn't a threat to health in the downstream reaches, and most of it has mobilized now all the way past the estuary at this point.
And to answer your question about the vegetation monitoring piece, there's always that conundrum of like, what do you have to monitor and what should you monitor? And of course, you know, like we always balance that between, you know, the agencies. The Yurok tribe takes a different view on this, and this is one of the things that we're going to be, that we've already started doing is in all of our collects, we do everything from 4-band imagery, so both RGB and near infrared, but we're also deploying thermal sensors, doing aviation, you know, aerial collects for the thermal, so medium wave, long wave, and short wave infrared, to just look at those indices across the landscape, so we can monitor vegetation health, but also look for cold water refugia places, cold water seeps that are just emerging, things like that. So it's an ongoing effort. We're merging that in and working with Res and the rest of the teams to try to figure out what to monitor when and for how long. But I think the short answer is we're in this for the long haul. So we'll be keeping doing that.
Yeah, I heard you say there's 193 miles between the dam removal and the delta, and I was just curious if there's any effort to see if there are detectable morphological changes in the delta as a result of removing these dams.
Yeah, so in the estuary, at the downstream area, the Yurok tribe, that's the area that we call home in the lower 40 miles. But in that estuary, it's really dynamic. But I think one of the things that a lot of people thought of is that the dam removal would, have this major effect in the estuary, and it really doesn't, because there's a lot of major tributaries below Iron Gate, the Trinity River, the Salmon River, Scott and Shasta rivers, and those provided these large flood events during different time frames while those dams were in. And so we're seeing a lot of that sediment that would normally, it's going to flush out, and it already has. I mean, sure, there's some dynamics, and we're monitoring that. We're doing boat-based sonar in the estuary as well as in the near shore, so we'll continue to track that sediment over time. And I know that's part of the KRRC was to look at Klamath River Renewal Corporation. They had obligations to look at up in Crescent City and the boat harbor for sediment dynamics up there and mitigation, so that we've been supporting them with some bathymetric surveys in that area.
This might have been a question for Amy, but I'll ask whoever's here. Obviously, we're all very inspired by this, and we love hearing the stories about the fish coming back. And I was also, seems like projects of this magnitude obviously have a huge economic and job development interest, and some of that was referred to with, the revegetation work. But I was curious how that message was delivered about the economic impact, and who it was delivered to and how that landed.
Maybe I'm not understanding the question exactly. Like, you mean who? Like the delivery was? I'm not sure what you meant by that.
Oh, just what was the kind of the job creation, economic development impacts of the project, and how that was documented, and how that message was told, and to whom.
Yeah, I mean the Klamath River Renewal Corporation. Their goal was to involve the local community. That includes local like Siskiyou County residents, as well as the local tribes, Karuk tribe, the Klamath tribe, Shasta Indian Nation, and the Yurok tribe, and so through their subcontractors, which was Kiewit and RES, Resource Environmental Solutions, they were the main prime contractors, and as I mentioned in my presentation, these organizations reached out to the local folks and embraced especially the tribal community, but as well as the local community. And so, there's been a lot of people a lot of jobs created. I mean, the crews that you're seeing out there that's been doing the revegetation, those are all tribal members, both, not just Yurok tribal members, but from the other tribes. This summer, for example, the Yurok Tribe Construction Corporation and our construction crews, laborers, heavy equipment operators, will be working alongside of RES and helping support that effort. And those are multi-tribal organizations too that will be supporting that. Shasta Indian Nation is helping do revegetation along with the Yurok tribe. So the job creation opportunity is huge, and lives are changing. I mean, this isn't a snapshot in time. This is a career-based program, and what we're seeing is tribal members that are coming out of high school that want to get a job, whether they want to be a equipment operator, a laborer, or engineer, or biologist. There's a job waiting for them, and there's enough work to support generations of work ahead in these basins. And this long-term stewardship and the impact that it has on the inspiration that it provides to the next generation to look for natural resource-based jobs in the community is huge. And we're seeing that play out, not just the Yurok tribe, but across all the tribes.
I'll just add to that from the communications piece. The KRRC had a really phenomenal PR communications manager who grew up in that area. She was local. She knew people, and she didn't. They tried to have as much transparency as possible. They didn't hide anything. She didn't say no to, a meeting or a tour with anybody. And so she was taking out, landowners who live around the former Cropco Lake. Those people are not happy about, a lot of them are not happy about losing their lake. She was taking out Siskiyou County commissioners. She was taking out, anybody and everybody who wanted to get information, had questions, hated the project, wanted to yell at her, anything like that. They were putting that out there so that those people could learn as much, real factual information about the project. And then they weren't hiding the things that were challenging. And they were doing water quality testing, and they were sharing those results, and they were making that stuff public. And so I think a lot of that, as a, sort of an outsider to that process, as somebody who was seeing the communication that they were doing, there's still going to be the, malicious naysayers and stuff like that. But there's a lot of people who just want to know real information. And if you give it to them, and you give it to them in a structured way, they really respond to that. And so I think having that really proactive and incredibly consistent and sustained communications piece really helped with the process.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Fantastic.